G'day guys, welcome to episode 24 of the Old World Behemoths. We've got a very special episode for you today, and not just because it's me presenting, but it's because we're talking about the Ogre Kingdoms. Woo! So, joining me is, of course, my absolute favourite Ogre playing Old World Behemoths co-star, Chris. What makes you a Behemoth?
I'm a Behemoth because I play Ogres, mate. The best faction in the game.
Oh, okay. No, that's fair. The coolest faction in the game. Yep, I would agree with you. I'm a Behemoth because on Friday, for the first time in nearly 9 years, I got a haircut. Oh, that's right, folks. Slapping away one hair follicle at a time. I'm once again regaining my scalp sovereignty from the oppressive disease known as alopecia. So take that, Chris Rock. How about that? Hey? I stand with Will Smith. So, we've, of course, if you go to the next slide... It is, yeah. So head over to the next slide, Chris. Before we get into what the episode has in store, of course, we need to look and thank all of our beautiful supporters. So Death 1942, Ghost, Pandem Wargaming, Joshua, Sick, Silver Dave, Gomo, Bonehead, Earl of Kent, Ulazed, WSWG, The Orange Juicer, Big Daddy H, Torytown 69, Prophet of Sotek, James Alexander, Twin Cursed, Cathay Balloon Man, Tajay Arson, and Behemoth Bridge. Thank you guys so much for being patrons. You keep the lights on and basically make sure that we can cover all of our overheads. It means a huge, huge deal. And if anyone that's listening right now or watching, of course, on YouTube, would like to subscribe, you can check out our description and become another patron of the Old World Behemoths. We'd love to have you on board. Otherwise, just thank you for tuning in and joining the discussion. Of course, also a massive thank you to Flemdog, who is composing all of our sounds and all of our musical background specialties. And of course to 25 Creative, who does all of our graphics. So with that basically out of the way, let's get into what we're looking at today. Okay, so Chris, you and I both play Ogres. We both absolutely love and adore Ogres.
Yes, definitely do.
Talk to me about what we're talking about today. About Ogres.
Yep. So I guess we're trying to get like a read on where Ogres are at right now. Part of that was prompted by the current Square Based updates that are going out. Part of it is prompted by, it's just been a while. You know, we've kind of gotten a feel for the edition so far and how Ogres play. Both of us have attended multiple events with Ogres and had pretty good runs. I think we've both gone 2-1 pretty much every time or something. So for a one-day event, not too bad. Probably as good as it gets with a Renegade faction outside of vampire counts. But also, like,
of course,
I think just wanting to touch base on why we play Ogres. Why we still play Ogres, because you probably have some people listening into this and going, guys, you know how Old World works. You know what the good factions are. Why would you play this faction? It is definitely not a top faction, even though we are the largest faction by size. We're just... we have other options. Why do we keep coming back is basically what I'd frame it as.
Yeah, correct. And of course, as you've said, the Renegades pack is imminently being released. Some reports as soon as within 2.5 hours. So we basically thought we'd get together, talk about what Ogres do well, what they do poorly, how to currently sort of win with Ogres, and of course, as you said, why we keep coming back to Ogres because of the fun playstyles and the fun models, and a bit of a wish list as to what we actually want to see going forward, or maybe in that Renegades update that comes so soon. So let's crack on again and have a look at basically what some of the Ogre builds or archetypes currently are. And how we can basically become the mightiest cowgirl of Ogres and defeat a Lord of Change. You know what? I might leave that to you.
That's us playing against Alex's flavor of the month demon, because he keeps chopping and changing which greater demon he uses, and that is our poor Ogres trying to do something to stop this horrific demon horde coming at us.
How would you actually deal with a Lord of Change as an ogre? Like just an ogre bull? I don't know. I'd run.
Yeah, I
I'd
don't
run.
know.
Surely.
I probably still want to
We'll
eat
find
it.
out.
It probably tastes.
Yeah.
Probably tastes good.
Yeah, if you guys ever
All right.
want like a superficial overview of who the ogres are as a sort of a raison d'etre, if you will, a reason for being, check out some of the cinematics from Total War Warhammer 3, where the narrator, I forgot what he's called, but the background guy, the hooded wizard man, do you know who he is?
Yeah. I think he's like soothsayer or something weird, like an oracle, something like that.
Yeah, he's like the sort of narrative drive of it all. He goes to the camp and he talks about how to sort of how to sell the objective to the ogres, which is that the ogres, specifically Greaser's Goldtooth, may he rest in peace. Thank you for that, end times. That none of them have ever tasted bear god flesh, and that's all they want to do. So that's the whole reason for the Total War 3 Warhammer campaign, is that the ogres just get off their asses and go and try and taste bear god flesh. So check that on YouTube. It's a riot. So Chris, let's start from the bottom of the list here, and we'll talk about essentially why we'd want to go for ogres, and then we'll hit the top in terms of their actual mechanical functionings on the table in the old world. Talk to me about why the theme is sick.
Yep, the theme is sick. So I guess pre-Cathay, these guys were the furthest east faction that we had. So you definitely get some of those like Asian themes, I guess like Mongolian horde themes kind of rolled in. They live in the mountains of Morn, I believe it is. They basically come on down into the rest of the old world when they're hungry. They're basically a bunch of mercenaries. So long as you could feed them, they're happy. The theme is sick because it's just a bunch of giant dudes running around, literally like running into people to knock them over with their weight, I guess, and then just pulverize them.
Yeah, their guts.
And then you've kind of got the more, I guess, fantastical elements, which is like the monsters that they ride. So they basically tame these crazy beasts. I think some of them come from like the Chaos Wastes in the north. Others are in the mountains themselves. But they're just these larger than life characters.
Yeah, it's really cool. And then recently, I guess the 8th edition rulebook that the ogres received was actually, I think, the first time that they received these mounted models, right? And some of those mammoth sort of vibed or mutated stony kind of icy themed models are just some of the coolest large based models that we've seen, I think, in the fantasy range or the square based range. Like, it's just really cool. And just having giants riding other giants is unique and odd and cool.
And like my fantasy memories are very hazy, but like I felt like they were almost the first proper centerpiece models that were released. Where it's like, you stick this gigantic model on a base, it looks sick, you can kind of build up an interesting diorama around it, and you can kind of theme the army around it.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of sort of the army composition, one of the ways that I think ogres in the old world as a legacy faction have been shoehorned has been points preservation, right? So the way that a lot of the rosters function currently, at least the successful ones, and we can get into that a little bit later, is by essentially having almost all of your core points and your character points in one big unit. So they would often be, we're talking maybe an 800-900,000 point unit linked in with between like 8 and 10 either Ogre Bulls or Ogre Iron Guts. And that's one thing that they do incredibly well. They're very durable, thanks to a lot of the upgrades that can sort of triple stack on top of themselves. So they have things like the Cannibal Totem to give them regen, and they have a Slaughtermaster with battle magic, and you can take a Lore Familiar, so they can take Oaken Shield, so they get a 5+ armor 5+ ward save, and then they bring a 4+ or a 5+ armor save as well. So you got a triple stacked stave. You're basically just putting a wounds bunker in there to preserve points, and you've got a high unit strength thing for objectives that can just walk around. Some people call that a Death Star. Other people will just say that that's the only way that ogres can play currently. But that's one of the things that they do well. So they have those high unit strength sort of units all going together, usually with a combat character like a tyrant or a bruiser, and a caster such as a slaughtermaster, whacked in with your bulls or your iron guts, and that's one way that you can essentially manufacture that your opponent, unless they kill that unit, which is highly unlikely, can't win big, or you can't lose big, I guess you could say. You know what I mean? So that's one really effective thing. And then you kind of fill it up with Noblars, which we would probably agree are very points efficient, right? The little 2-point guys that run around.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether they're 2 points efficient in some regards. Like, it's kind of crazy how many you can get for so little points. But then at the same time, I feel like they're almost necessary now, particularly with how missions have gone. I would like to point out that, like, I think ogres were initially set up quite okay in the old world because of the changes to how like step up and all that worked. So initially, because we're so many wounds base, when a unit charges into another unit, the fighting ranks are the ones that end up fighting, and whoever strikes first, gets to kill some models. Because ogres is just so tough and have so many wounds, it was very likely that you were getting most of your swings back, even if you were getting charged, because it was very unlikely that someone's going to wipe your front rank, versus like a bunch of ogres hitting the front rank of, say, an Empire Spearman unit. Well, early old world, they probably got no attacks back.
Yeah.
Now that things have changed a bit, I think we've lost a little bit of that edge. Yeah, I feel like we've lost a little bit of that edge because they've added a whole bunch of rules to try and buff units, like infantry units. But we still, having high toughness and high wounds is great.
Yeah, definitely. And I think in terms of the durability aspect of things, ogres don't have a problem. They do that triple save very well in one unit. Yeah. And they don't lose a lot of models, and that's the whole point of that preservation thing, right? Where they sort of flounder is the strike back, but we'll get into that in a second. So usually you've got like a 400-ish point unit of bulls or iron guts. Then you add 400, 600, 800 points of characters in there, and you flesh out the rest with Noblars, and then probably cannons. Like, the cannons are some of the best in the game. Would you agree? They're heavy chariots. They're strength 10 because they're great cannons. Yeah. They're D3 +1 wounds. They do a bit of everything. Where they flounder, again, is probably their low leadership and the fact that they can be tied up quite well. But so can any cannon,
Yeah. I think with the cannons, they're not as damaging as other bigger cannons, but the fact that they're moving and shooting, and they're quite scary in melee. So, like, traditionally, how you deal with a cannon is you'd send off like a skirmish unit or something to go harass it in the back lines, and you'd be fine. You can't harass an iron blaster because it will fight back pretty well.
Yeah, decently. Yeah, so it's got the 3 attacks from the ogre on top. It's got the 3 attacks from the Rhinox and a little Noblar. It's T6. It's 4-up save. So the cannons are really good. But where I'm trying to go to is, unfortunately, where you get that points preservation core. You got characters that are basically doing all of the damage, right? Your Ogre Tyrant or your BSB Bruiser are kind of the only places that, outside of those cannons, are doing the damage. You start to see that shoehorning or that bottlenecking of the archetypes that you'll see in an Ogre Kingdoms roster. So let's flick over to the next slide and look at what ogres don't do so well. So you're talking about the points efficiency of Noblars. You were saying that you don't think they might be quite worth those 2 points? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying, well, yes, because I think they should be maybe like 3 or 4 points.
Right.
I think they are too cheap. Yeah. But then I'm counteracting that by saying that, the rest of our list probably pays a little bit too many points for the wounds that we get, and our outputs as well. So it's kind of a bit of a balance thing, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd largely agree with you. As I said in the previous slide, we've got that durability tick. We can do that well. That's nice. The problem is the swing back. So despite the fact that front rank might not die, or that front rank doesn't really suffer the detriments of step-up rules with the way that combat has evolved in the old world, the swing back still leaves a lot to be desired. yeah, it's awesome that we get so many attacks, and it's awesome that we're strength 4, and it's awesome that we're or potentially strength 6, depending on the type of unit that you're bringing. The weapon skill 3 is so brutal. You know, it's just absolutely insane. And when you kind of compare that to the things that you want to trap, like large monsters, they're usually weapon skill 7 or weapon skill 8, and you're starting to hit them on 5s, right? And then because you're putting so many points into one unit, or even in multiple units as an MSU faction, the swing back really limits your efficacy or your efficiency, which is a problem. And because they're monstrous infantry, all you need is a unit strength 5 unit to hit them in the flank or the rear, and they lose all their rank bonuses as well. So that's another sort of really damaging problem to have if the majority of our units are in these big blocks of ogres, and then it just takes one sort of group of horsemen or one group of 5 Cathay halberdiers to hit them in the flank. Like it's quite rough, and it means that all of the damage must come from the characters. And as I said, and you said, it's great that we have a 2-point Noblar, but we're also paying like nearly 40 or upwards of 40 points per model for an ogre, and that's just our line infantry. And it just becomes this ongoing issue of solely being in existence for points preservation. And that bottleneck leads to, as I said before, just playing for that small win or that small loss, which means that we're never really reaching for the top table at events, if you'd agree.
Yes, I do. And like, I think the core problem of like our main ogre body being probably slightly overcosted is that body is copied out to so many different units, like man-eaters, for example. And because it's not very efficient on its own, that just makes that unit less efficient, and then you just basically never see play. I think people were trying to make like man-eaters work really early on because they had some interesting rules, and I just think they kept getting weighed down by, it's like, man, I'm paying like 200 points for this unit that's not even that big, like, and it's probably not going to win. Yeah. It's probably not going to win most of the fights that it ends up in. Yeah, it was, and it's hard to put like, because we're relying on our characters for some of our preservation stuff, like the Slaughtermaster with the spell, or the banner.
Yep.
You have limited sources of that triple save or even double save, and so the units that don't get that, they're not that resilient depending on what they fight.
I completely agree. And the problem is, due to the fact that monstrous infantry don't get, without renegades, any of the outnumber special rules or the massed infantry special rules or anything like that, often you're not outnumbering, so other units are immediately going to be getting, if they're infantry, of course, +1 combat resolution. Because of the weapon skill 3 and the fight back aspect, you're not going to be getting many combat resolution points from actual combat. So it lends yourself to having to expand your units so substantially. And the reason that I think we see a lot of ogre units and ogre playstyles / archetypes funneling into that one big unit is because other units are just so, excuse my French, like dog shit at scoring combat resolution points, right? Maybe outside of Mournfang, if they get a successful charge. You don't really see many units, and the Noblars are often run at minimum because you just expect them to die as soon as they get contacted. So it's just a shame in terms of, you know, the way that we have to build. And a lot of that, I think, comes from the next point, which is going to be monsters. The monsters just aren't that good, and they're so beautiful, as you were saying before. Like, they're centerpiece models. They're meant to be kind of the thing that goes bang, right? You've got this ogre riding a huge beast, and it should be a little bit more effective than it is now. You might disagree. I know that we have slightly different ways of playing our mounted characters, at least. But if you're taking anything bigger than an ogre, a lot of the time, it's probably not going to do very well for you. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, I love those models, so I like to run them a lot. Again, I think we've been left behind a little bit by the tweaks that they've made to the edition. So early on, I didn't mind running the BSB on a monster with War Banner because I was finding that I was about break even, sometimes slightly up on most infantry blocks. But now with the changes that they've made, those infantry blocks, their combat resolution's probably higher than I can ever hit on that monster. And suddenly it's like, what's that monster doing for me, right? He's just a giant point sink. He's not actually doing the jobs that I need him to do. And I can't buff him any further than what he's currently at. So I think they've been left in the dust a little bit. I think if I was to kind of do an emergency patch to them, I think just dropping their points right now would help, just to give us maybe an extra unit in the army. That might offset things a little bit. But realistically, I think monsters just need a look out for the next edition of Old World. It's probably a lot of things that they could do better on monsters. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I think in terms of the ogre playstyle, I don't disagree with you at all. And the main thing that I want to see is, and I know this sounds odd, I don't want them to touch weapon skill in a weird way. Like I think it's uniquely ogres to be unskilled at fighting, because all they are is hungry boys coming down from
dramatically.
Wait. I think
hungry boys who fight all the time. Yep.
But maybe not well. They just sort of belly push each other, you know? Like, it's not that talented. Whereas an elf is pretty good. So I think they need ways
or a Chaos
to
Warhound.
Score. Yeah, well, I mean, saber tusks are the best fighters in the book, right? They're just so expensive. But they just need a way to passively score wounds like stomps, because in 8th edition and previous editions they had stomps, and I think that might be an interesting way to bring them back. But then, you know, do you address it through monstrous infantry buffs or just for ogres? Like, monstrous infantry don't have stomps as a rule, so how do you do it? The impact hits are awesome, but they're also very unreliable because you know, you have to make charges and you're not swift stride or anything like that.
Yeah,
so
I think
it's a bit difficult.
I think that impact rule that we have, I think when it first came out and when I was reading it, I was like, this just doesn't really make much sense, because in order to get AP on it, you have to add ranks to your ogres. So suddenly you're going deeper instead of wider.
Always.
It is like, well, always. But it's so hard to get more than one rank, really, in an ogre unit, unless you're putting like all of your points in one giant Death Star.
And that's what we
So
see.
we had this whole special rule that basically didn't really come into the game at all. And I know other factions have a similar problem where it's like, oh, your special rule does effectively nothing. But it is a shame. I would love to see ogre faction rules which do buff our monsters a little bit. It's like, we should be the monster faction. We should get some benefits to running monsters. And I would say that I'd still want to see monsters like buffed a little bit, but yeah, I'd also like to see some interesting dials that you can press in, say, an ogre roster in order to change up your monsters a bit.
Yeah. So, you know, another reason that this episode is existing is because we're also wishlisting, but we'll get to that in a second. We talked about how Noblars are probably too efficient, right? Or maybe, you know, just good enough. Outside of things like your rear strategic location, or maybe holding your baggage train, or potentially even domination, I think Noblars leave a lot to be desired. They're not skirmished, you know, they're not cavalry. We don't have anything in that sort of avenue to adequately score points. And I think the one objective that we do well is probably domination, if we bring enough units of Noblars. But that's really, again, limiting the archetypes that we have to bring. Like, I can't choose between Marauder Horsemen or Chaos Knights or Chaos Warriors or Marauder Footmen or, you know, a whole bunch of different core units like Bretonia as well, like Battle Pilgrims or Archers or Peasants or Knights on Foot or Mounted Knights, etc. We've got very, very limited options in terms of how we can play and how we can do that well. The Saber Tusks, I mean, they're like weapon skill 4, and they're 2 wounds, that's great, but they're 17 points a model, which is quite expensive for an impetuous, potentially skirmishing unit. I love ambushing them, but you have to bring a big unit before they get to a reliable unit strength 5 for things like baggage train. So, you know, I think we have a lot to be desired in terms of the actual objective play, especially because we're incentivized to pour so many points into one unit. I find our spread is quite lacking. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, so again, as the edition has changed, as particularly community comp packs have rolled in, we've gone from what was effectively just a kill point game where we played okay at that level because typically we're
Yeah.
quite beefy. We can run like a few units on the table, pump all our points in, and hope that one of them doesn't die, and we can kill a few of the opponent's units. Now we've shifted all the way, and this includes the match play guide. We've shifted all the way to suddenly there's these objectives, but the way that they've scored the objectives, the way that they've done controlling, is quite detrimental to our current setup and just our stats. Like I'm sure we'll get into it a bit later, but the Gorge is probably the perfect example of this. It's a great model. It's pretty decent rules wise, but it's only 4 wounds, so it can't do baggage train. It doesn't count for a lot of objective scoring because you've got to be 5 at least, and that just means that why would you pay 90 to 100 points for it when it's not doing any objective stuff, and we have so few spare points to take more units anyway. Yeah, it's just hard.
I completely agree. And I think, on that unit strength issue, another thing that Ogres don't do poorly is the actual rank and flank game, right? We do the ranks really well, and we do the front-to-front combat really well, but we don't have a lot of options in terms of efficient flanking units. The Mournfang, I understand that they're theoretically another cavalry unit, and they want to hit things in the side, and they want to do this, and they want to do that, but they're such a large model. And our Gorges are unit strength 4. Our Sabres are incredibly fragile and very expensive. Our Mournfang, the frontage is like this big, and they only count as unit strength 3 as well. So they have to have 4 Mournfang before you're, hitting something like a heavy infantry block in the side and cancelling its rank bonuses. And trying to get a flank with 4 Mournfang is actually like... call me crazy, but it's actually a little bit difficult. So, because they're quite an unwieldy unit to play with. So that's another thing that we do poorly, and I completely agree with you in terms of that. So let's go on to the next slide, and noting, the fact that we're really looking at wishlisting, and again, that update, it might be here within 2 hours, and we're very excited about it. But what are we wanting
so
to see?
I don't know if we're rolling into that exactly, but do you want to just touch on the final point of this slide, because it is probably quite.
Oh, yep.
Important.
Yeah, of course, it's a big one. We're not a
we're not a core army, so we are one of those renegade, legacy, whatever you want to call it, factions. That means we effectively don't really get any updates from GW specifically. That's why we are quite excited about the Square Based pack, because we actually get, some updates to our faction. And that's also what makes it really hard to sell to new players about this army is, hey, if you really like the models and you want to buy in, just be aware that GW doesn't give a fuck about you, basically. They might when they do a new edition, and they might roll Ogres in. There is a rumor that Ogres might fully come over to Old World. But that's not in the next.
Don't tease me like that, man.
Short while. It's
you ever
not
watch Good Will Hunting?
Well, I could. Yes, I have.
Have you ever watched that movie? You know the scene I'm talking about. It's not your fault.
I do.
Don't tease me like that. Anyway, sorry. Keep moving on.
Let's move on.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Before we get into the wish list, let's have a quick think about the successful archetypes. As you alluded to at the very beginning of the episode, we've been going to our local scenes here in Sydney for quite a while. I think in the Renegades sort of meta, or the Renegades pack, thank you so much, Square Based, I've not, and you've not gone worse than 2-1 with Ogres, which is pretty good. Like, I'd be happy with a 2-1 at a 3-day event, kind of any day of the week. Both you and I have flirted with being top 3 Ogres players in Australia, thanks to 2 events or 3 events. That's how popular they are, of course. But, they're doing fine in terms of their win rate. And if you go on Old World rankings and you look at all of the data, they're doing okay. Like, they're at 45% win rate. The problem that we're seeing is that there's just not that much variety in terms of how to build those rosters. Whereas other factions, granted, they're not legacy. They don't have a limited pool like we do. They have a lot more options. And I think that's kind of what we want to see. We'll get into that in a little bit. But as we said before, it's points preservations. You've got 1 or 2 combat characters plus a Slaughtermaster in those bulls or those Iron Guts. You touch that up with 1 or 2 cannons. You usually have a mounted character or a BSB on a mount to try and give you that flank. And then you fill the rest out with Mournfang if you're only taking 1 cannon, or Noblars if you're taking 2. And if you go on Old World Rankings again and you have a look at all of the existing data and you look at the lists that are only losing 1 game per event, you won't really find that much variety. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. And I'd also touch upon, with all those different comp packs, we get hit extra hard when those character limits come in. So our characters are disgustingly expensive base because they're on an ogre body. So anytime that they dip, character allowance down, or they put even a hard cap on, like, say, a Lord character, it just hits us just that little bit extra hard because we kind of need our characters to do a lot. They're so expensive. Really, if there's any cap on characters, it effectively means you're having to drop an entire character because you're just not going to be able to fit it.
I completely agree. Yeah, and the problem is, as you said, with that expense, just to give you an example, a level 3 wizard in a different faction might be, I don't know, 200 points-ish. For our my dog is giving me the craziest eyeballs right now. It's just uncanny. To get any other, to get an effective wizard to do what you want effectively in ogres, you're looking at minimum 300, 350 points, right? It's kind of obscene what we have to pay. It has to go into the front rank. It doesn't have an armor save. It's just kind of scary to be able to target that character in that unit, and just usually we're only bringing that Slaughtermaster for battle magic for Oak and Shield. It's a real big tax, and I wish that wasn't the case. But alas, here we are. So flick over to the next slide, and we've just got 2 examples of effective rosters. And these are basically, I'm giving examples of my roster and Chris's roster, but if we extrapolate out and you go into Old World Rankings, which I encourage you to do, you just won't see that much variety, right? So you've got 2 combat characters. One's mounted. One's on a Thunder Tusk in my iteration. The BSB there. The Slaughtermaster, as I said, is level 3. Battle magic. It's got a Spell Eater Axe and a Lore Familiar. The Tyrant and the Slaughtermaster go into those 10 Ogre Bulls. That means I'm running a 4 front, 3 deep unit. It's supported by 2 units of 20 Noblar fighters, and they're going to play that domination game. Saber Tusks to try and limit a counter charge by chaffing something up. 3 Mournfang and 2 Iron Blasters. So I'm running a very upgrade light edition or iteration of that roster. You'll see a little bit of variation in Chris's one soon. But essentially, that's it. That's the archetype, right? You've got a mounted character, usually for inspiring presence purposes. And that will be the basis of your damage. And then you've got the rest of those points stored in a bull unit or an iron gut unit. I like it. It's fun.
Yeah,
don't get me wrong. It's effective.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I guess just to touch on kind of when you build an ogre list, what I typically find, and I think you already touched on this before, was I put basically 1,000 points in characters because they are the best output. Also, I usually want to run a monster, so that's a lot of points as well. You have to take 500 points a core. Guess what? That's now 1,500 points. I've only got 500 points left. There's so little
That's it.
else to kind of take, right? It's our options are just so limited. And I think if our other units were able to do what our characters did, maybe you would drop a character and take another unit, and then you'd see a lot more variety. Yeah. But it's almost like you're playing on autopilot with 1,500 points, and it's the 500 points spare that you just tweak to your kind of heart's content.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I've stripped all of my upgrades. Our audience has probably seen me lament Mournfang for a while. I've stripped all of my upgrades from those Mournfang because I don't like them. And I need to run 2 Iron Blasters because I just find if you're not running that combat tyrant in the block with the tenderizer and the death cheater and the armor of meteoric iron, etc., one dragon can just come in there and chop you up, and you don't have much to do about it. And if you lose that tenderizer tyrant, the only way that you can deal with those monsters, I find, is with cannons. And the only way that we have cannons is with iron blasters. So that's just, again, the autopilot nature of the ogre faction. So yeah, I don't run a tenderizer tyrant on a Stonehorn, but flick over to your roster, Chris, and talk us through that. But it's essentially the same thing.
Yeah, so tyrant, tenderizer, talisman of protection. I'm putting him on the Stonehorn. I'm basically trying to build so this is usually with a 500 point cap on the characters. One character. So I'm trying to get him as close to that 500 points. I want him to be our version of a dragon. Obviously, nowhere near as good, nowhere near as maneuverable, but that is a scary unit. That is a very, very scary unit. Then I've got the Slaughtermaster. I've given him a little bit more upgrades. So I guess one of the differences between me and you is I like the Demon Slaying Scars. So he goes in with the Iron Guts, and now they're causing terror. That can come in clutch sometimes. Certainly with certain infantry blocks that can really be terrifying. Certain armies just don't care, right? Undead, for example, but it's something that has worked okay. I really like Iron Guts. I just like having the extra armor save. I know you can get a little bit more bulls for the points if you went that path, but yeah, I just like Iron Guts. I like having the extra saber tusks because I like having a little bit more chaff on the board. But the trade-off is I've dropped an Iron Blaster, taken a Gorger and a Mournfang, an extra Mournfang for it, and upgraded my Mournfang a little bit. So the Gorger is a bit of a cute pick, to be honest. I kind of just use him on a far flank somewhere and just harass something. If we're playing table quarters, maybe it's a unit that my opponent is leaving in a back corner to score points. The Gorge is not going to take the quarter because, as we've mentioned, he's only unit strength 4, not 5. But he's going to go and kill enough models in that unit to hopefully stop my opponent from scoring it. And I like having that extra Iron Mournfang, hoping that they just absolutely blow through enemy units. Doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's good.
Yeah, just worth noting that the domination is unit strength 10 or more, so you can't score it with the Gorger anyway.
Oh, there you go.
Even if it was unit strength 5. But the fact that you could flank or baggage train or something similar with sort of, with a positive reward, I think would be quite strong. But I agree with you. You've got slight different variations in the rosters that we're presenting. I'm basically trying to go light, also take a BSB, but essentially we've got a combat character on a mount, a big bunker of bulls. We've spent a lot of points in characters, and that's 1,500 points of what we've got, and we try and flesh out the rest. So it's very similar. And if you go on Old World rankings, as I said, and you sort of look at successful ogre rosters, unfortunately they're all the same, or at least heavily inspired by that one archetype. I can't really see any fringe benefits. And even if people, there's always a bit of a toing and froing with meta games in Warhammer. You're trying to beat the meta. And it's not just Warhammer, of course. It's X-Wing and it's Legion. May those games rest in peace. But at the end of the day, you're trying to get one step ahead of the meta. There's not really much that ogres can do to get ahead of the meta. You can't bring some fringe weird unit that's going to deal with what the Cathay are putting on the table today. Yetis are not the answer. Hunters in a Sabertusk unit are not the answer, unfortunately. We're just a bit stifled, I should say. So with that ado, do you have any further comments on sort of current state of ogres, or should we go into wish listing and what we're hoping to see from the update in maybe an hour and a half?
I guess just for me, it's both of us have played around with different lists over period that we played Old World. And yeah, like this kind of feels like the set in stone way of approaching ogres at the moment. Don't
It's solved.
dive into this faction thinking I'm gonna run all monsters, or I'm gonna run all hunters and all yetis. Look, you can give it a go. You're probably not going to have a great time. It's probably not going to go well. Maybe with the updates, which we'll get into in a second, it opens up some doors for us. But I think really hammering home, we are a renegade faction. We don't really get updates. We kind of have a limited roster compared to some armies. You're just going to have to deal with that for this edition, I would say. And if you're happy with that, if you're happy with running lists like we've just listed, they're great. They're good fun. Like, definitely run them. You'll have a great time.
Yeah, concur. Let's have a look at what we want to see, hey?
Yeah.
So
50% off all ogres points-wise, please.
Exactly. So I think I'll talk about the plussing to wounds first, right? If mounts go to +5 wounds, then at least you've got the option of your tyrant on a mount to not only get the benefit of close order, but also it can now flank heavy infantry and cancel their rank bonuses. And that gives us a fun new way to play ogres, because your tyrant and maybe a different smaller unit can essentially intersect or charge simultaneously and actually do that effectively, right? And I think that would be a really, really fun way to play. In addition, you could do the same thing with Gorges, because they're monstrous creatures, which means that their unit strength is as per their starting wounds. If they get just one more wound, they become unit strength 5, and that just opens the box in terms of their scoring efficacy, and I would love to see that. What do you think about those two changes?
Yeah, I mean, I think other than the character one with a very particular build might be a little bit oppressive, but not really, because it's all your points in one unit, right? I think just adding those wounds to unlock the rules that they've written around unit strength goes a long way to solving a lot of problems with ogres. I know we're not wishlisting about actual core rule changes, but I would like to see for the next edition a disconnect from wounds to unit strength. I think there just need to be separate rules and separate kind of tables for that, so that you can point to a Gorger. Let's say four wounds for a Gorger is fair. That's all that they want. But they turn around and go, yeah, but they get this rule, which means that they count as unit strength 5. If that's how it has to be in order to get that kind of balance in, I'm more than happy to go down that path. But right now, with the rules that we have, just those little wounds tweaks would go, a long way.
Yeah, definitely. The other thing that I would love to see, and I'm in a few different minds about it in terms of the most appropriate direction, but I think at a minimum, I'd at least like to see the Square Based boys try giving Iron Fists -1 AP. You see a lot of the different types of weapons, like ensorcelled weapons, or what are the elven weapons? They get reroll 1s to hit, or something similar, and then the murderous from the Dark Elves, they get reroll 1s to wound, but that's on any mundane weapon. I think I'd love to see Iron Fists gain -1 AP, because that would open the box of playstyle for the ogres. You could have mounted characters just relying on their -1 AP plus their innate armor bane. So you're relying on those 6s, and ogres have a glutton of attacks already, so you're trying to fish for those 6s, which is kind of fun. That means that they could use different big names, or they could use different magic items, because at the moment all we're seeing is Power Scroll, Lore Familiar Slaughtermasters, and Tenderizer Talisman of Protection tyrants, right? But if I can suddenly take Mastodon armor, or I can suddenly take weird different big names and have them on mounts and just go for those -1 AP shots, like I'm kind of cool with that. Like maybe we could see Paymaster's Coin, or these different weird fringe magic items, and I'd love to see that. It also benefits things like Man-Eaters, because they're strength 5 already, they're toughness 4, they've got 4 attacks, but they just don't do anything. And maybe an Iron Fist would make them worth their points, or at least feel worth their points, because with all those attacks, you could get heaps and heaps of wounds. And especially for Mournfang, the parry rule that the Renegades guys have written in maxes out at 3+ armor save anyway. So Mournfang get literally no benefit, which means that the only way that you see Mournfang run is with great weapons and with heavy armor. But if they gained -1 AP and lost the parry rule, and they could maintain their 3+ armor, or maybe even go to 2+ armor, assuming they get Armored Hide 2 or something similar in the Renegades update, then they could actually have two different playstyles. You could go the real durability-centered one with the Iron Fists, or you could go for the great weapons and heavy armor and, you know, the Totem of Wrath, etc., and just go gangbusters. So I'd love to see an Iron Fist change to something like an ensorcelled weapon, because I hand over heart believe that would just crack the basket open and create so many different and fun variations. What do you reckon about that one?
I'll be controversial and say even go a step further and make it magical attacks like ensorcelled weapons, because we actually have so little access. We have so little access to magic weapons. If we come up against an ethereal list, what do you do, right?
That's a good question.
There's very little you can do. But like I agree. Like -1 AP. Yeah. Sorry, you go.
No, just real quick on that. Like it's not a terrible idea, because the German comp guys over in Europe, they've essentially allowed Iron Fists to still be paired with magical weapons. So you still get the +1 attack, but you also get a magical weapon potential. And so you can get +1 attack with something like an Ogre Blade or with something like a Sword of Might. That could kind of be cool. I don't think that that's going to break the bank, and it would also work with sort of your suggestion.
Yeah. But no, I think the -1 AP would go a huge way to helping output as well with ogres. Like, I know we're at high strength, but there have definitely been times where I've smashed into a unit and just basically just tickled them because they've got like a 2-up save or something. And you're relying on your impact hits and a few other things to try and get you the combat res enough to do something on the first hit. Just -1 AP would be awesome.
Yeah, it'd just be a start, right? And then we can test things out and see where they go from there. I'd love to see the Stonehorn at least get its impact hits back. Sorry, its stomps back, because I find that just the impact hits, like it's okay, but everyone can play that 3-inch game now. You know, if I fail a charge, then the unit that I want to charge just moves within 3 inches of me, and that the creature that I've paid 195 points for the sole purpose of getting really good impact hits just does nothing now, and it also has no stomps. So we'll see what Val and the Square Based boys do there, but that's at a very minimum like what I'd love to see. Just those 4 things. And I know that the community probably has a glutton more, and so many more. But what do you reckon? Do they align with sort of your suggestions?
I think they're the most realistic ones. I just think that in terms of the Ogre roster, like Yetis are just garbage. Oh, I'd love to see just a rewrite of them. And the Hunter as well. Like he's cute, but he doesn't do anything. Also, he takes up a valuable character slot that we can very rarely afford. And I also think the monster riders, so the non-character ones, again, just way too many points for what they do.
What are you doing?
So you basically never see them. So there's a lot of changes that could be made, and I would love to see any of them made. Because as we were alluding to earlier, unlocking doors for the ogres to allow more varied lists is kind of what the end goal that we just want, even if it's just one unit that we can start to roll into our rosters. I think every ogre player would love that. And I don't think it's asking too much. Like, I don't think it's going to break the game if Yetis got buffed or Hunters got buffed.
Yeah, I agree. And, even that, again, the Iron Fist AP1 kind of makes the Hunter like a relatively good combat character, because he doesn't have to pay any extra points for a crazy magic weapon, and maybe he can just sit back and throw his ranged weapons until he hits combat. One thing that I did see perusing the 8th edition Ogre's book yesterday was the Thunder Tusk had a rule called Smooth Ride, which means that any move penalties are not suffered by the rider with their shooting attacks. That could be really cool as well, because it means that the harpoon launcher would be able to be thrown by a hunter with BS4 at a relatively accurate rate. And it would open up maybe a mounted ranged attack ogre kind of monster mash. That could be really sick.
Yeah, for sure. Anything to see more play of monsters.
Yeah. For the hunters, absolutely. So all of this, obviously, with the caveat of, the Square Based boys and Val are doing an incredible job at bringing the ogres to life. Like, none of this would be possible, and our 2-1 records probably wouldn't be possible without Renegades already. So this isn't a criticism. This is just what we would love to see as ogres players, maybe at a minimum. And I'm sure that these 4 points are going to be completely swept aside by whatever awesome actual rules changes Val makes overnight that we'll have revealed in a few hours. And of course, we will review them and provide some feedback and do a video on them. But yeah, that's kind of what we're really, really hoping to get for in the next few hours and for our Ogre boys. Yeah. So do we have another slide, or are we done?
We're done.
Okay. Well, do you have any closing thoughts on, ogres in general, or the efficiency or efficacy of ogres in the future, or are you happy to close it out there and see what the future holds?
Yeah, I think I would say, from my perspective, my journey in Old World so far, they were the first faction that I focused on and kind of picked up and painted for Old World. I love them to death. They are genuinely good fun to play when things go right. It can get frustrating at times to play them against certain archetype, like double dragons. I don't even know what you're supposed to do. But at the end of the day, they are fun. I think they really embody the old world. So, like Warhammer Fantasy days, they are quite a wacky faction. They feel like they really belong in the old world. And I would love to see more support, not just for them, but for all of the Renegade factions, because it's really all of the factions together kind of make up what I like about Warhammer Fantasy. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to any changes that benefit ogres in the future.
I couldn't agree more. So thanks so much, guys, for tuning in, and thanks, Chris, for joining me here on this sort of roundtable review of the state of play for ogres and what we're expecting, or at least wishing for, come Val and the Square Based boys update for Renegades 2.0. And we'll see you probably in less than 24 hours with an actual breakdown of what the changes are. And we can't
only the
can't
biggest
wait for the next
clickbait react videos.
Yeah, we'll have a photo of us being like, oh, it's going to be crazy. It's going to be beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, thanks very much, guys. You've been, of course, watching Old World Behemoths, or maybe listening to Old World Behemoths, because we have quite a beautiful little Spotify community going on. And we can't wait to see you next time.
All right. Cheers, guys.